For years, people have wondered why the most courageous action star in the world never had the courage to walk towards his daughter, when he could always walk towards danger. Today, at 19 years old, Suri Null, or rather Suri Cruz, the girl the whole world knew, finally speaks up. She does not speak through a magazine or television show this time, but through the life she wants to construct in a world beyond her father's reach. The life she leads holds a truth much heavier, sadder, and far more painful than anyone anticipated. When Suri reflects on her early life, she can see where each break occurred because she had witnessed each instance when she was much too young to have comprehended them. She was born on April 18, 2006, in St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica. The birth took place with quiet. She did not have her birth celebrations marked by joy, but with quiet. Her mother, Katie Holmes, adhered to Scientology's silent birth practice, which involves a mother not making any sound concerning her pain in child delivery in front of men in black suits. Tom Cruise described it as devotion. Katie referred to it as survival. Suri simply knew it to be her first memory she never chose to have, a beginning in which she lived according to rules she would soon have to spend her whole life escaping. In her earliest years, Suri grew up in a world of her own construction, which presented a facade of perfection. There were red carpets, magazine covers, private mansions, personal security teams, and a whole appearance of a happy Hollywood family. However, this facade concealed fissures, which were already developing in private. Katie's parents were very concerned about all sorts of influence surrounding their daughter and granddaughter. Friends observed that Katie never went anywhere alone. She always had Scientology representatives trailing silently behind her, observing her every step as if she were under constant surveillance. Nevertheless, all this, Suri never knew. What she knew were footsteps in the hallway, movie nights with her parents, warm arms lifting her up, and a father who seemed larger than life. Then, when she turned 6, the footsteps stopped. The sounds in the hallway stopped. The man who used to hold her hand when she walked with him through the streets of New York vanished from her life. Then June 2012 marked a year when everything changed. Her mother went for a divorce just a week before Tom Cruise turned 50, in one of Hollywood's quickest and most astonishing splits. To the world, this was a split for a Hollywood star. But to a 6-year-old child, this meant she lost half her world in an instant. Yet Suri did not wail. She chose to go silent because a child does not need an explanation for comprehending when someone they love is no longer there. During these months intervening in the divorce lawsuit, it seemed to the world that Katie Holmes had achieved a radical and swift change of mind. The reality, which Suri would not grasp in all its complexity until many years later, is much more calculated. Katie had worked out her break with precisely the same level of skill and strategy used by a military commando. Behind her smiling face on all the cover shots in inescapable glossy weeklies, she lived in a daily state of fear. She had changed her phones a dozen times. She avoided walking down some corridors in her own apartment because she was afraid those corridors were bugged. She had replaced many of her employees she thought were feeding information to her husband's Church of Scientology. And every night, Katie hugged her daughter a little bit tighter because she was afraid one wrong move would mean she never got to see her again, because she would lose custody. She chose to go to New York because she knew they were very supportive of a parent who protected a child's sense of stability, she says. She did everything in her power to make sure Tom wasn't expecting this when she did it. He didn't. He read about it in the tabloids, just like everybody else, because it went public in a very big way. For a man who had controlled his image for so many years in a way most people can barely imagine, this rejection in particular may have hit very hard. As court records have since shown, the one thing Katie really fought for in this case? The right to raise her daughter freely without Scientology influence. Ex-members reported that Katie was afraid that when Suri got a bit older, she would be likely to be placed in the church's harsh Sea Org organization, a place she thought a child absolutely shouldn't have to go to. To make sure this didn't happen in the future, Katie chose to do whatever it took, including sacrificing her profession and relationships and her personal safety and whatever bit of privacy she had left. The divorce was finalized in July 2012, just 11 days after she'd put in the papers. Tom offered child support payments of approximately $400,000 a year, all medical and educational expenses, and full custody of the child. Of course, this wasn't what Katie really wanted. What she really wanted was her freedom. The next day, she and Suri slipped out of Los Angeles unnoticed, into a new life in New York City, with just a few boxes, and the hope that perhaps distance would be the answer they were searching for. But for Suri, all this sudden change had meant an education in a life where her father was a presence. The presence everywhere in screens, posters, newspapers, but not in the car seat next to her. She had an invisible father. For most kids, memories of fathers come from bedtime stories, weekend fun, and school functions. But for Suri, memories she chose to hold on to were fading pictures from before she turned 6, when she last felt like she had a whole family. Life in New York is a quiet Obad narrowed in whole by her mother's shield. Katie takes her to school, cooks her simple meal, assists her with her homework, and does her level best to protect her from all the attention which followed them wherever they went. But there is one thing she simply can't shield her from: the silence. As time went on, Suri observed her father not as her sister, but rather as a distant observer. She observed her father clinging to skyscrapers, racing through action performances, executing stunts that no other actor in Hollywood would attempt. Every time she walked into a bookstore or a movie theater, he was right in front of her. He was everywhere but in her life, which weighed far heavier with each passing year. Without a card, phone call, or simple indication, he remembered the child he used to call a miracle. When she turned 10, her doubts in her mind began to crystallize. "Where's Dad?" slowly turned into "Why doesn't he come?" She attempted to console herself with the thought that her father must be very busy. Busy saving the world on screen, but not busy in her world. She soon began to realize in her early teens when she saw her friends being picked up by their fathers after rehearsals and sports practices. She stood in a corner with a fake smile, pretending she didn't mind, pretending it didn't hurt. She learned to be emotionally independent, not because she chose to, but because she had to. She alone took the subway, worked on school project alone, and walked with her disappointments in silence, so her mother wouldn't worry. Meanwhile, speculations in the media went on. There were reports in 2013 that Tom had met Suri just once since their separation. Then, nothing was heard or seen again. To the outside world, it was a Hollywood intrigue. To Suri, this is just life. Life with a father who is more of a hearsay than a memory. But in all this, she never learned how to dislike her father. A child never learns to dislike. A child aches. This is the reality she learned in her silent years. Suri was old enough by the time she turned 14 in 2020 to research for herself. She grew up listening in, if only to scraps of conversations adults were trying to keep from her. Snatches of Scientology, custody struggles, rules, limits, and control, spoken with an intensity she never missed. She hadn't understood any of it for years. But when the lockdown rolled in during the pandemic, and she finally had her moments alone with her own thoughts, she started searching for a truth she'd never had spelled out for her. She read interviews, documentaries, and accounts given by people who left Scientology. They all added up to a puzzle she never knew existed, but she saw herself in it in a way, not a direct mention, but a side effect of a system she never knowingly participated in herself. Ex-members were usually advised against maintaining a relationship with people other than fellow organization members. Some were threatened with an end to these relationships if a member of their family left or were unwilling to participate. Suri was a child and no threat, but she knew very well what outside meant. It meant distance. It meant separation. It meant a father who absolutely would not, or could not, cross a boundary established by something beyond the reach of love. That truth had shattered her. She did not grow up to dislike Tom Cruise. She grew up waiting for Tom Cruise, waiting for a message on her birthday, waiting for a visit, waiting for a moment when he would pick her over all else. But with each passing year, she saw increasingly that she had stood in a doorway for 12 years, waiting for the sound of footsteps that would never come again. She took her first steps into the kitchen one 15-year-old morning and found her mother sitting at the table, her eyes red-rimmed from reading an article in the magazine about Tom's latest film premiere. Suri didn't ask her mother any questions. She didn't need to. They both knew the truth. Katie had borne the burden of her daughter's abandonment for all these years by herself. But she never talked negatively about Tom. She never used her bitterness to shield her daughter from reality. She chose to cling to one thing in this part of her life. Some truths were far too much for a child before she was ready for them. And by the time she turned 16, Suri was ready, not for the media truth, but for her own. 18 years old in April 2024 marked not just a birthday, but an awakening for Suri. It marked a turning point. It marked a moment when she legally qualified as a being capable of making her own decisions, speaking her own truth, and making up her own mind without allowing anyone to have a say in it, not including the man with whom she shared her last name all her life. She had months before her 18th birthday in which she worked on her college application essays, filling a lifetime of wordless pain with words which testified even to her college application readers. She wrote, "Sometimes we don't grow up with love. We grow up with the space love leaves behind." This marked the first time she had articulated in her life things she had been feeling since she was 6 years old. She did not name her father in her application. She did not have to. Everyone in the whole wide world knew exactly whom she meant. While other teenagers were marking their 18th birthday with celebrations, Suri marked hers in front of her reflection in the mirror, with a deep look into her eyes, which saw a young woman in front of her, who had dedicated half her life to missing a man who was still alive. That day, she understood she did not have to wait any longer for a call which never came, a hug which never happened, or an explanation which never got given. That marked a very important moment in her life when she took a personal and strong decision. She will not be Tom Cruise's daughter anymore. On May 17, 2024, she signed all the documents necessary to legally change her name to Suri Noel Holmes, selecting her mother's middle name in honor of the woman who had carried her through a storm alone. She did not cry. She thought she would. She did not. She felt relief, a relief that comes when a man finally stops holding onto a thread that's given him nothing but pain. The world took notice of her name change in an instant. She saw her name in her graduation from high school, cast in her performance in the Addams Family musical, and soon after in her acceptance letter to Carnegie Mellon University, where she would begin to major in fashion. They called it an act of rebellion. But she knew better. She knew it for an act of freedom. An act of freedom a girl can achieve when she escapes 12 years of quiet and steps into a life where she is not shadowed by another man's name. But by the time Suri began her freshman year at Carnegie Mellon University in the fall of 2024, she had already achieved this transition she had worked towards for years. She was no longer the child in front of whom every step had to be recorded, no longer the child whom the world pitted because she never got to have a father, no longer a symbol of a marriage which Hollywood thought would last an eternity. She simply existed, a college-going fashion student, riding the subway in Pittsburgh and New York with complete anonymity, finally living a life which remained unaffected by her name. Katie visited her regularly, moving her into her college room with boxes and tired but grateful hands and a happy mother's smile, because she knew she had achieved the impossible. She had raised a daughter in a life where she herself remained a global superstar with a child who never heard a peep from her because she went quiet when her marriage ended. But she still grew up into a good, kind, and ambitious individual. In all her interviews, all she can talk about her daughter is she's an amazing individual. Little do people know, Suri's strength lies entirely in her. Meanwhile, Tom Cruise lived life on an epic scale, filming giant franchises, getting ready for a NASA-backed film in which part of the production will take place in space, and securing new lucrative contracts. The world hugged in approval every time he put life on the line in a helicopter, a towering skyscraper, or a moving train. But one thing he never put on the line again was walking across a room to repair a marriage with the little girl who had previously run into his arms. Sources within the family claim he continues to cover her education and medical bills, exactly as mandated in the 2012 settlement. But he hasn't been pictured with her in over a decade. Suri, now 19, knows this reality. She no longer waits for her dad to appear. She no longer checks her phone when her birthday rolls around. She no longer waits in the doorway of her memory for a man she knows will never come. Rather, she continues to forge her path in building her own life, her own dreams, her own future. The child who used to cry in her mother's arms now stands confidently into womanhood with the name she chose herself, Suri Noel Holmes. For the first time in her life, truth is not something she is afraid of. It is something she claims. The question her life asks is simple. If you were her, would you reach out again or let go?